Good morning. Thank you, Robin. I have my speech upside down. Welcome to the 12th edition of the Night Media Forum, the forum that began as the now I don't even remember, Robin, what did we used to call it? The MLS. Welcome to Miami on behalf of my many colleagues from Knight Foundation who have organized this. Particularly Jennifer Preston, Sam Gill, Lily Weinberg, and of course our indispensable Robin Ryder, with whom I just took our 12th anniversary picture. She was there at the very beginning when Dan Gilmore had written an op-ed in the paper and inspired a speech I gave to the Community Foundation conference, and I just couldn't figure out why are community foundations not paying attention to news in their local communities. And so I said, well, if you're interested, it'll be February in Miami, and you're all invited. And Robin nearly had a heart attack because there was 1,000 people in a ballroom in San Francisco. Anyhow, I hope you enjoyed last night's reception at the Perez Art Museum. It said Perez, just because you're in Miami. Anywhere else, you can call it Pam. But it's the Perez Art Museum. It was really wonderful to see so many old and new faces. I've got to say, I know this is the wrong thing to do, but I really do want to recognize that there were some extraordinary moments for me in that reception, seeing two of the trustees who were most supportive of Knight changing its course and moving in this direction, Mariam Noland and Paul Steiger, and they were there last night. It was great to see them. And it was also great to see two of the partners that have been fantastic, two of the funding partners that have been so fantastic along the way, and they're Craig Newmark and David Haas are both here at this conference. And so I know that having named 4 people, I now have offended 600 of you, and I apologize for that. I have the privilege of leading a foundation that is both national and fiercely local. We are social investors focused on informed and engaged communities, the bedrock of a healthy democracy. That bedrock, however, has begun to quake, and we're not just here to describe that problem, but to find solutions. We're here because the way we inform ourselves is insufficient to meet the demands of a democratic republic in the 21st century. If you do not have a well and consistently, reliably well-informed citizenry, you will not have a functioning democracy. And we're here because we think one of the 3 ways forward is local news, and I'll say more about that in a minute. The emergence of and quick dominance of search and social media, the rise of talk radio and opinion broadcast presented as news, taken together with 20 years of layoffs and shutdowns at legacy news outlets, have radically altered our newscapes. Internet platforms, I think everybody obviously knows that or you wouldn't be here. What seems a little less obvious to folks is that internet platforms that decimated the business model that sustained newspapers for most of the last century have concentrated data and therefore power in just a few and very global hands. The result is that the web of local news outlets that was so uniquely and valuably American is in disarray. Communities left without a broadly shared common baseline of facts about what just happened, where we are, or who we are becoming more and more common. And ironically, it's in those local communities where I think we have the greatest chance to rebuild the trust we've lost in our institutions, in our news, in our leaders, and in ourselves. The shorter the distance between our neighbors and our news, the stronger our community. In a very simple way, there is strength in local, and local leads to trust. That's really not a new concept. for news, nor for that matter is it for Facebook that began built on that local trust of people you knew. When there's a distance, though, between news and reader, when readers can't really have a common sense understanding of what they're reading, between event and citizen, you create a breeding ground for misinformation and disinformation, as we see in social media and search platforms eroding trust in our news and ripping apart the social fabric. Having spent most of my adult life supporting local journalism, and I say that specifically because my son, who was an AP reporter, would often remind me that I was merely a lawyer who ran a newspaper, while he was actually a newsman. I do find this turn deeply troubling, but I am really buoyed, not just by your presence here, but by a different emotion. It's hope. I'm neither an optimist nor a pessimist. Optimists and pessimists see a glass of water half full and come to different conclusions. I'm a prisoner of hope. I believe no matter the obstacles in our ability to do better, and I believe local equals trust and is at the core of our way forward. I believe that based on history and the knowledge of what we've already overcome. As an example, before Gutenberg mechanized the printing press, there was order. The monks illuminated a few manuscripts a year, and the cardinal gave it its imprimatur, and everybody knew what the truth was. After Gutenberg, there was a flood of information. The speed of information was almost impossible to deal with, and for 100 years, the public had trouble figuring out what was true. That sounds a little familiar. We're constantly evolving our media landscape. Not long ago, most Americans received their news from print newspapers or the evening broadcast on television, trusted brands. When we started this conference 12 years ago, literally, we polled the group, 98% of the people who registered for this conference got all of their news from newspapers and maybe some from the evening news. Internet allowed social media to break the dam, multiplied the sources, and concentrated the distribution systems. More people than ever got information, and that came with a flood of misinformation, harassment that you all know about. The distribution of information was consolidated into the hands of a few enormous and less regulated companies that are global at their core. And as you'll hear in stark, because I know her, stark, unflinching terms from Dana Boyd in just a few minutes, the internet has come a long way from its utopian aspirations to democratize access. I mentioned that local news was one of the three avenues we need to travel to the right course. The other two are technology and law. And as a practical matter, our focus is on local, but we really do need to be aware of the need and possibilities of using artificial intelligence agents to solve the problems of misinformation and disinformation that artificial intelligence agents were used to create. And we need to consider that global internet companies continue to be governed by rules written for print and broadcast in the 20th century. We need fresh concepts of economic competition. Should we return to an earlier notion of trust busting, where the public determines something is just simply too big for the good of society? Should the laws of libel and product liability apply to digital services and products? Does it make sense that in this area of society, social media should not have the responsibilities a producer of any other product might have to consumers or a news organization to its readers or viewers? That may change, and Congress, if I understand the nature of recent hearings, has taken note of the awesome power operating outside its realm of understanding. I think the rolling thunder is just over the horizon, and this may even be one of those moments where left and right will come together. But both technical advances and debates about law or possible regulation are largely outside the scope of the conference, since our focus is on finding new ways to fulfill the underlying purpose of local news, sustaining an informed citizenry, or as Jack Knight put it, illuminating the minds of readers so that the people may determine their true interests. An informed citizenry builds trust among each other, the cornerstone of a healthy democracy, and at its most basic, local leads to trust. For a decade, with the help of many of you in this room, we've explored different approaches to helping local news adapt, and we're ready to apply what we've learned. 3 weeks ago, the Aspen Institute's Knight Commission on Trust, Media, and Democracy issued its report, which I would recommend as a primer on these issues and as an index of possible ways forward in civics and local news. Last week, Knight Foundation announced a new initiative to revitalize local news, doubling our previous plan and raising the ante to $300 million. But I stress, I will note that that applause was not led by our CFO, Juan Martinez. It actually is, for those of you who run foundations, as a side note, this is really rather an unusual event because the board had to make a very unlikely decision, and that was that the endowment will stay flat for 5 years, and all of the earnings on the investments will be invested in this effort to revitalize local news. But I have to stress that that really is only the ante, and that's why I'm really delighted to see you here. And I was so glad to read NYU professor Michael Posner's call in Forbes magazine for a Marshall Plan for journalism. That vision evokes the scale of the effort necessary, not by government, but as in the original, not by government as in the original Marshall Plan, but by we the people. We start with local because some of the most remarkable journalistic feats in our nation's history have been local. If you think about it, even the Watergate stories, which brought down a president and changed the course of history, were written by 2 Metro reporters. The Catholic Church's suppression of sexual abuse was uncovered by the Boston Globe's local investigative unit, and I don't know where he is, but Ben Bradley, who is one of the leads in that unit, is here at this conference. 2 weeks ago, the Southern Baptist Convention sex scandals with hundreds of people involved were uncovered by the Houston Chronicle, and maybe less glamorously, but just as meaningfully in the world of information needed regularly. Last year, when a gunman murdered 5 journalists at the Capital Gazette in Annapolis, their colleagues responded by putting out a newspaper the next day that was not liberal and was not conservative, but just told the story of what happened in town and what might happen next. That builds community. We start with local because we believe local leads to trust, I'll say again and again and again, and because that's where we think the scale best fits the citizen. And anyone can participate. We hope you'll leave here convinced of that. Over this day and a half, you'll have plenty of chance to talk about who's doing what in local news, and you'll meet many of the people running these extraordinary programs. But the key part of that Knight initiative in trust, journalism, and democracy that I really want you to remember is, number one, it's about local news because that's where we think trust can be regained, but number two, it's structured so that anyone can participate. Even our press releases included the way to go directly to the grantee organizations. This is really a critical difference in the way that we've approached this. No matter what you're passionate about or where you live, there's something in it for you. If you want to support investigative journalism, go look at ProPublica and their local investigative journalism program. If you want to help Outlets pursue sustainable digital business models. Donate to the American Journalism Project. If you want to place reporters in a range of newspapers around the corner, there's Report for America. If you understand the need for legal support for journalists, support the very practical efforts of the Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press and legal clinics at various schools supported by the Stanton Foundation and others. Choose one or several that catch your attention, and you can be part of the solution. The solution is local, and local is trust. The fundamental goal of a $300 million push, or ante, is to reinvigorate news at the staging ground for the middle, a place where common facts are the common prize, and in doing so, help rebuild that trust. When I was thinking about a keynote for this conference, thinking about the technical obstacles of the unknown, the unintended consequences regulation might bring, or law, or technology, thinking about what we might be unleashing, thinking about the lack of trust we've come to in this country and what we might do, I happened to come across a piece that quoted the two great writers who were also social activists. One was James Baldwin, the other was Simone de Beauvoir. Separately and passionately calling for your engagement in society. Baldwin wrote about race, de Beauvoir wrote about women. Baldwin said, "We made the world we're living in, and we have to make it over." We made the world we're living in, and we have to make it over. And if you leave this week's media forum with just one thought, let it be from this combination of their messages. We made the world we're living in, and we have to make it over. It is ours to do because the present is not a potential past. It's the moment of choice and of action. It's ours to do. Thank you for joining us at the Night Media Forum, and now we'll move on with our program. Thanks.